All right, we are back. It's been almost a month since I posted. Things got a little crazy. It turns out this is much harder than I thought it would be. Having 3 kids and a marriage and in-laws and parents and everything. So this is like, let's get back and let's just get something on the board so that we can get back in the saddle so we can get things keep rolling again. I was listening to the Sincast, Cinema Sins podcast a long time ago. And they said like the number one thing that they did in order to be successful was to be consistent on YouTube. So obviously not posting for a month, that's not me being consistent. But like, I'm getting back on it today, and then I will post again on Thursday, and then we'll consider that back on track. I realize that that's 2 weeks that we still missed, but that's what we're going to do. That's my motivation for getting back on it today. So something simple, short, and sweet today. I want to talk about stereotypes because I'm the only person who I've ever heard say this. And maybe people have said it in a different way. If they have, post, comment down below, send me a link to a video. I'd love to know it. Stereotypes are offensive only if they are true. So if you give somebody a negative stereotype, right? The reason I even thought of this is because I was watching Matt Rife, comedian, super funny, does a lot of crowd work. I feel like a lot of the things that he says could be considered offensive, but he plays into a lot of stereotypes in order to make his jokes. And I was watching John Cleese long time ago, and I think this was in reference to some of his Monty Python sketches. John Cleese, absolute legend. If you don't know who that is, look that up. If you don't know who that is, you're probably too young to be listening to this podcast. But he said humor is innately critical. So he tried to come up with the least offensive joke. He said, this is probably the least offensive joke that I've ever been able to find, come up with, work with, whatever. And then his least offensive joke is, how do you make God laugh? You tell him your plans. Simple joke, right? But what he's saying is basically you don't know. You don't know what the plans are. You don't know what's good, what's right. God does. So you tell God what your plans are. You make him laugh. As a parent, I feel like that would be very similar if my kid, they're going to stay up all night or whatever. There's 101 things that that my kids might suggest are a good idea or plans that they might have that it's like, okay. So humor is innately critical, right? Like that's what it is to be funny. So then let's go back to Matt Rife making some of these stereotypes. Like he was working the crowd with like one of the ladies had a hijab on and she was talking about her religion of Islam and he was making some stereotypes about that. And one of the things he did was he was like, oh yeah. And he was like giving her props or whatever. And he was like, yeah, way to go. And gave her like a little fist bump. And then he went and grabbed his water and then he came back and he was like, wait, let's do the fist bump again. And he goes and blows it up and everybody laughed. Now, why did everybody laugh? Right. Exactly. But if I was to do that same joke, not me, if Matt Rife was to do that same joke, like with like a Christian white guy, right? And bringing it back and be like, hold on one more time. Boom. Like, I don't know why you did that. Like it's not that it's offensive or not offensive. It's just like, okay. I've always said this about like anytime you do like a racial stereotype or even if it's a stereotype that people have deemed a demographic that's okay to make fun of, right? Like I'm a white guy and one of my favorite jokes that I keep seeing, well not keep seeing, but I've seen pop up a couple times on the internet is like white people 1,000 years ago and it's like a picture of Vikings and they've got like this long braided hair and these beards and these big axes and they're like totally yoked and ripped and they're like crusading to steal and pillage and whatever. And it was like, white guys 1,000 years ago and then white people today. And it's like this nerdy guy in a button up and he's like, ooh, this mayonnaise is spicy. Like that's hilarious. It's also white guys, right? So it's a demographic that people have deemed okay to make fun of, which is, I guess, a slightly different topic. But the point is, the reason that it's funny is because it's true, right? There's some truth to it. So same things with stereotypes. You're stereotyping white people to make a joke. So anytime you stereotype anybody else, men, women, races, whatever, it can be funny. It could be offensive, but it's not offensive if it's not true. It's also not funny if it's not true, right? So I think that we got to let that go. I was in an interpreting training program, Western Oregon University. We actually spent a couple of weeks on stereotyping. Because when you're an interpreter, you have to work very quickly. And it was very odd because most universities are left. Western Oregon was no exception. I got shouted down all the time for ever having any kind of different opinion. Next week, or actually on Thursday, I'm going to talk about one of my projects that I had to do. One of my presentations. That's what I identify as. You don't identify as things. That's a whole different topic. I'm gonna write that down. I've been making a list on here. How you identify. I've been making a list on my phone. I've actually been texting myself ideas for the podcast because I have found that one of the hardest things is when I sit down and I'm ready to go, I can't think of anything to talk about. If I'm playing video games with the fellas, I'll have thoughts and I'll just have to tell myself to shut up because like then we can't hear on Tarkov where the guys are coming from. We get ourselves killed. I know if any of you guys actually end up listening to this, you're going to be like, wow, there's thoughts he has that he doesn't say. I could talk more. I could talk more than I already do. That's my point. I digress. We actually discussed stereotyping in the interpreting program because sometimes you are thrust into an environment, especially in medical, where you don't have time to like sit down and have a conversation and like, what's your ASL style and how do you? I was an ASL interpreter before I became a dad. What's your background? How old are you? Did you grow up hearing? Did you grow up coda? Like what's your deal or whatever? Sometimes you don't have time to synthesize that. So you have to just use what you see. Like how old do they look? What signs are they throwing out? Is it more of a signed exact English? Is it more of an ASL? What regionality maybe they've got? What speed are they going at? Typically people from the South and New York sign a lot faster than the West Coast. Oregon area is some of the slowest signers out there, right? So like you have to assess all this information really quickly. What color are they? Black sign language is very different than white sign language. There's a lot of different slangs and signs that people use. Trust me, the first time you screw up the N-word in an interpretation, you will know it. And they will know it because that appears very obviously on the lips when you say that word out loud. So you are encouraged to stereotype to understand who you are interpreting for better and faster automatically as a good thing. And what they say, the program, which I actually think is really valid, is what they say is they use that information. They tell you to use this information, but hold it loosely because you could be wrong. And I agree with that. But I also think that if you are suggesting that either stereotyping is bad or that you should not stereotype, then the idea of cultural appropriation is non-existent. Because I think that those completely coincide, right? Those are parallel concepts. They do not intersect. There's no overlap there. They are the exact same, or I guess they're like this. They're not like this. They're like this. Cultural appropriation and stereotyping are the exact same thing. And let me explain what I mean by that. If I was going to say, I think one of the least offensive ones is probably, I don't know, maybe not. I worked construction for a really long time. Here's another stereotype, right? I worked construction for a really long time. I was surrounded by Mexicans from the time I was 13 until I was 25 working construction. My dad owns a construction company. I worked all the time. Surrounded by Mexicans, right? So like if you were going to stereotype, right? So which is like a negative connotation. If you're going to stereotype to the point that when I was talking about who I was working with at Western, I was talking about people that I was working with. I was like, oh yeah, there's like Hector and Yvonne and Miguel and Carlos and Gabriel. And she's like, it's really offensive that you're just rattling off Hispanic names like that. And I'm like, that's so interesting because I'm literally telling you the names of the people that I worked with. So I'm not creating a stereotype and regurgitating nonsensical information. I'm actually telling you the reality of my situation. But for some reason, you ascribed to me that I was stereotyping them instead of just telling the reality of the situation. But at the same time, the same person that would be mad at me for stereotyping, if I was to put on a sombrero and a poncho, they would tell me that I'm culturally appropriating. So what is it? Because that would also be considered like stereotyping, right? But if cultural appropriating is bad, stealing their culture, then stereotyping should be fine. Because you're suggesting that all Mexicans wear sombreros and ponchos, which they do not. That's just part of Mexican culture. So if I'm using that, if I'm taking that and using that because I want to wear a poncho or a sombrero, I mean, what if I just wanted to wear a sombrero on a job site because the reason that you use a sombrero is because it's really effective at keeping the sun off of you? Is that still cultural appropriation? So I think they were like the one and the same concept. One is, I would say, when we studied linguistics, we had something called negative and positive communication. And it wasn't like a good and bad communication. Positive communication is outward and negative communication is towards you, right? So like my wife hates it whenever I used to bring up this concept of indirect speech acts. And that's another topic we'll put down, indirect speech acts. Indirect speech acts. Look at that. Another podcast. Boom. If you use language to bring somebody closer to you, for instance, like if I want my door shut, I'm like, hey, let's shut that door. Now together, we're working together, right? Like, let's shut the door. I'm really telling you to go shut the door, but let's shut the door. Or like, can we shut the door, right? I'm asking a question. Like, do you mind if we shut the door? And again, we shut the door, right? So I'm pulling you closer to me. That's negative, right? I'm creating smaller space. Now that I'm saying this out loud, I might literally have those backwards, but the point is it's not good or bad. It's forward. It's moving somebody closer to you or giving them some autonomy, right? So asking the question it would be the positive or the negative. I'm gonna have to look it up. I think I'm getting those backwards, but I'm like giving you autonomy, right? I'm allowing you to answer the question instead of saying like, let's close the door. That's a command. I've still used, so the original would be close the door. That's command. But if I say, let's close the door, I'm bringing you in. That might be the positive. Let's bring you in, bring you closer. We're doing that together. We're like, hey, do you mind if we close the door? So now I've given you some autonomy to like answer the question, right? And I've said do you mind if we close the door? So we're closing the door together and I'm allowing you to answer the question, right? So I've created this positive verbal interaction rather than just shouting at you to close the door. Okay, so now let's go back to stereotyping and all these different things. So if cultural appropriation is real, then you would have to stereotype. You would have to use the negative of stereotyping in order to create the culture that you are saying people are appropriating in order to be mad about the cultural appropriation. Like, the whole cultural appropriation thing started with that girl that, like, wore a dress from China or something, and she got blown up on the internet, like, your prom dress is not my culture, and all this, like, whatever stuff. So, like, again, okay, so you have to stereotype that, like, all Chinese people wear, like, well, it's from China. Okay, well, if it's just from China, then are you suggesting that nothing from China or Chinese culture can be used by anybody else? Is that what cultural appropriation is? Or is it simply anything that you deem non-white? Which feels very racist, no? Like, for instance, this is the one that always gets me in trouble, and this is the one that I'm going to do. I'm trying to front load everything on my channel to get me canceled or demonetized or whatever. So that way, if YouTube isn't going to like the way I talk, I know about it now, and I can move on to a different platform, right? So if I am having black people over to my home that I have never met before, there is a couple of food items that I will try to have on the menu that will stereotype what black people typically like to eat. Now, I don't understand. If I eat those foods and drink those drinks, is that me cultural appropriating them or not? If I try to have something ready to go for them, right? So let's use this example, right? I'm having a black family over to my house, and I'm like, all right, I'm going to make sure that I'm going to have like orange soda and grape soda available. Maybe we will have fried chicken, and I will try to have watermelon as one of the sides, right? Maybe we're doing like a barbecue in the back. And I typically do like beef brisket and whatever, right? But I'm like, I'm going to change it up a little bit, and I want to make sure that we've got fried chicken and watermelon available. Now, if they come over, are they going to be mad that I tried to think, hey, typically people involved in black culture like these things, oh, that's nice, or are they going to be mad, or are they going to be happy about that, or are they going to be mad that I stereotyped them, right? I mean, comedians do this all the time. They make jokes about that and everything. And I feel like, particularly with black people and food, that quick grab, right? Super offensive. That's so mean or weird or whatever. But I feel like if I was going to have an Indian couple over, right? Like one of the ladies that was in my wife's MBA program, she was Indian. And I feel like if I was going to have her family over and I tried to cook Indian food, not knowing anything about her, where she's from in India, it turns out there is a lot of diversity between northern and southern Indians. I believe she was Northern and he was Southern, her husband, and that they didn't even speak the same language. There's a lot going on in India that I don't know about. But if I was to try to make like, long grain jasmine rice and curry, I feel like that would be like respectful. But for some reason in the black situation that's stereotyping and gross. But at the same time, me cooking Indian food could be considered cultural appropriate. So like there's no line, there's no rules. It just feels like a weapon to shut down whoever you want to, unless you actually peel back some of the layers and you're telling everyone essentially that if you don't act your race, that it's wrong. That's what I hear. Cultural appropriation to me says if you don't act your race, you're wrong. Which just is racist, no? That's just racist. Same thing with stereotyping. If we acknowledge the stereotype, then you're being racist or offensive or whatever. But if you don't acknowledge the stereotype, then aren't you just ignoring everything that's not white? Or ignoring everything that's not you for anybody who's not, right? Yeah, I don't really have anything else to say about that. I don't understand. Stereotypes are not offensive if they're not true. And if they're not true, then they're not a stereotype. So why are stereotypes offensive? Because it's true. It's just truth. Even if they're bad, good or bad. I don't understand that. And like, well, it's not true if it's a stereotype. It's not true. Obviously. That's why it's called a stereotype and not a scientific law. All black people have excess or more melanin in their skin. It's what makes their skin dark. That would be like a biological fact. Saying that all black people like watermelon is a stereotype. That's obviously not true all the time. But I want you to go find me the majority of black people that don't like watermelon. And that concept, how is that even close to offensive? I like watermelon. My dad likes watermelon. My mom doesn't. It's watermelon. It's some shit we eat. Who cares? But so going back to the dinner, right? Let's go back to the dinner. What if I specifically, in an effort to not be offensive, I made sure that there was no fried chicken and no watermelon, no grape soda, no orange soda? So didn't I just like reverse stereotype then? Like didn't I use stereotypes and knowledge that I potentially know about black culture that I know that like, well, that's the stereotype. That's what they like. And I did the opposite. I don't know. It all just feels bad to me. The concept is just so stupid. I think it's so stupid. And everybody has the ability to... I don't eat pork. I grew up Adventist, Seventh-day Adventist. I am Seventh-day Adventist. Haven't been to church now that we're down here yet, but I want to get back in there. We love it. My kids love it. My daughter loves it for sure. We don't eat pork. And a lot of people are like, oh, when I tell them, like, oh, yeah, no bacon or whatever, when I'm at a restaurant, they're like, oh, you Jewish? I've gotten that question a lot. Oh, no. And I'm like, no, I'm not Jewish. That's essentially, they stereotyped Judaism, right? They took what they knew about Judaism and they applied it to me because Jews don't eat pork. They applied it to me. And I said no. That was the whole interaction. I'm not emotionally devastated. I don't need therapy. No one is reaching for some kind of brain enhancement medication. It's fine. It's fine. The only time I can even see that even being a problem is if you forced somebody into a stereotype, but then you're just an asshole. It has nothing to do with stereotyping or anything. Then you're just being an asshole, which is separate. Anyway, I would love to hear how I'm wrong. I would love to hear if you could hit that like and subscribe button. That would be awesome. Let me know how you disagree. Stereotype me, right? Look at me. I'm a white guy, pudgy, wearing glasses. My hair is thin. My hairline is making a run for the border. I bet there's a whole bunch of stereotypes you can make about me just based on my appearance. Like snapshot. Take that snapshot right there. Make some stereotypes about me. Chances are you're right. You know, I don't know. It all seems like a giant wasted time of bullshit. That's what it seems like to me. So, anyway, we're back in it. Keeping it under 20 minutes. 19 minutes and 30 seconds as of now. Hopefully by the time I get done running my mouth, it'll be under 20. We'll see you guys again on Thursday. I have an actually prepared one rather than an off-the-cuff one. And I'm pretty excited about it. So, I will see you guys on Thursday. Thank you.